Good morning and welcome to day 3 of our Tommy Flowers Network Autumn Conference on Data Science. Hopefully you've been able to join us for the past 2 days and hear some great speakers and some really interesting discussion in the panels. If you haven't, then you'll be able to catch up with those on Feedloop and eventually also on our YouTube channel. Today is all about putting data science and AI into action. So we're going to be hearing from a number of different speakers from a diverse range of organizations, and they're going to talk about some of the challenges and pitfalls of making it happen in the real world. Mike.
Great, thank you very much, Carol. Yeah, the last 2 days we've covered a huge amount of material. Day 1 was all about models, and we got into some discussions around data wrangling, models that cheat, which I found a really fascinating concept from that particular perspective. A really great discussion from Blaise Egan around statistical science and how that underpins a lot of the AI and ML methodologies that we're seeing, as well as debugging and skills. Day 2, we kind of went a little bit deeper into some of the technology when it was about anomalies, glitches, and how to find them. So we got into things like geospatial analytics. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that kind of terminology, go look it up. It's a really fascinating bit, new technology that's kind of developing in the whole AI space. Then we got into some things around anomaly detection, the explainability of AI, and then we spent a huge amount of time yesterday, including in a panel discussion, around the bias and transparency. So we got into some discussions about how do you kind of identify bias in the first place, how do you prevent it, and then when you build models to detect it, how do you know you haven't actually built bias into your models that are doing the detection? It was a really complex topic area, but one that if you're following a lot of the discussions around AI and ML in the press, it's a very, very pertinent discussion about some of the stuff that we're doing. And then we had a discussion with Alex Healing around the human machine and collaborative analytics. And this is having human in the loop. So whereas we don't just go fully autonomous with AI and ML, there's a human there being able to monitor and also make decisions and being aided by the AI systems. And then we got into outliers and debugging with Sam Mead from MIT, which was another fascinating discussion. And the panel discussion was really fascinating because we covered a whole range of those kinds of topics. And as Carol said, today it's all about, let's put it into operation. Yes, we know AI and ML is not perfect. Yes, we know it has some issues around bias, it has issues around transparency. Collecting the right data to actually do what you're trying to do is a complicated task. Most corporations don't have their data in the same spot. It's in different formats. It's in different structures. It may even be highly inaccurate. But I think the key thing here is at least start the journey down AI and ML. It is not going to go away. So today is about, let's operationalize it. How do we take these models and take the models that check the models and operationalize it to give you an effective AI and ML system to where your organization and your company can get insights from it at the end of the day. So on that note, what I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker. So I'd like to introduce Zoe Webster. Zoe is currently the Artificial Intelligence Director at BT. Her previous background is quite fascinating. She had a background from Kinetic and an organization called SEA, which is the Systems Engineering Assessment Limited, which does a lot of work with military organizations in terms of technology. And she's also worked at Innovate UK for a while. So a really fantastic background to talk about how to operationalize all of the AI technologies that we're seeing. So on that note, Zoe, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for such a lovely introduction. I'm really pleased to be talking to you all today, and thank you so much for the invitation. I've just got one slide to share with you, and I just wanted to make the point that, I'm going to be kind of starting off the day talking about really how you operationalize what, the kinds of things that I've been talking about, and it sounds like I've missed a lot of fascinating discussions. And for me, it's really about thinking through the questions that you need to ask yourself when you're looking to do this, looking to embark on setting up a centre of enablement, or whatever you want to call it, of people who care passionately about operationalizing AI and allowing it to make a difference to a business. So I'm setting out the questions. I am not pretending I have all the answers. So on that note, I will click on. Hopefully this works. Apologies, my slide's not moving on for some reason. There we go. Right. So as I said, I've got the questions to pose, not necessarily the answer. So I think the first thing to think about when you're looking to harness AI for your business or for your organization is to think through the strategic context. What really are the opportunities for you as a business? My boss, who you'll be hearing from later, Adrian Joseph, talks about kind of 4 key value drivers. So you've got revenue and trying to increase that. You've got costs that you want to drive down. You've got NPS, so really what your customers think about what you're giving to them or what you're providing to them, and also risk mitigation. So in an organisation, particularly in regulated industries, you're looking to mitigate your risks. And so out of those, which are most important? How do they connect to each other? What is it you're trying to do? And then think about why AI, because, I think there's a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of AI washing. We know across the several industries, really AI is about, getting insight from data. And it's just one way of getting insight from data. So the important thing is, what role does getting insight from data play in your organization? Where is it lacking? What do you want to understand more about? So only when you've thought about those questions should you be thinking about, okay, now it's time to think about how we can bring AI into the equation. And think about why now as well, given those value drivers. Why is now the right time to be thinking about this? What is the context of your industry, of your markets, your customers, and thinking about, is now the right time to do this? So before embarking on AI, before thinking, AI is the way to go, I think it's really important to think about those things. Purpose and objectives, what matters most? Going back to those drivers, one thing I kind of want to emphasize as well is that, there are lots of companies that are using AI, developing AI, but generally it's in pockets. So, slightly different to the digital native companies that we know and love, but many other companies, they are exploring AI, but really in small areas, in pockets. And actually the trick is trying to do that all at scale. So I think it's not just development of AI, it's also how you scale that up is really important as well. So actually the scale part of it might actually matter most in some areas. There's a question about when you're thinking about setting something up to scale, whether you do something centralized or you do something more distributed or something somewhere in between, like a hub and spoke model. So thinking about the context of the business or the organization you're in, thinking about what other functions there are in operations, how they're facing the customers, how they're working with customers, thinking about how that needs to work in practice, who needs to be making those decisions about where and how AI is developed and how it's deployed, and making sure that you understand how that might work in practice. So there's a lot of discussion that you need to have about, how this aligns with everyone else in the business. And objectives, we talk a lot here in BT about objectives and key results, OKRs, but, what are the objectives? What does good look like? What does it mean to have successfully deployed AI? How would we know if we've done that? So thinking very carefully about your objectives, both in terms of the value that you're looking to generate, but also the impact on the business as well, more generally, the impact on customers, and thinking through what those objectives are and how they should look. People and principles as well. So I think one of the things I wanted to leave you all with at the end of this was actually, I haven't really mentioned the technology yet, and I'll get to that a bit later. I think really it's people that are the important thing, the important element to think about. So what perspectives are needed in the team? So when you're thinking about AI right from development or early exploration, even through development through to deployment, what different perspectives do you need? You certainly need the AI developers and the experts, of course, but actually I'd say they're just one small part of what you need. You also need people who understand the business and the business drivers and understand they're the ones who will know when you've succeeded. And so being close to them to understand the opportunities or the challenges that they face and to revisit whether you have addressed those challenges is really critical. the domain experts, the people who really understand where the data that you're using is coming from and what it represents, is really important. So, you know, when we miss out on that, that does cause problems. So that could be domain in terms of the physics of our networks. It could be understanding the dynamics of customer behavior. It could be about processes within the business, people who actually understand what the data is and what it could be telling you, what it represents. And I think, you know, also you need people from the legal perspective, the kind of ethical and responsible innovation perspective. So we talk to them a lot. You need people from HR to understand, you know, how we can recruit talent and how we can make sure that, you know, we recruit and retain the best people. So there are all sorts of different perspectives that you need to bring in when you're thinking about this. And I think there's a tendency to focus on the technology, focus on, have we got a deep learning expert? Have we got someone who knows about reinforcement learning? Well, actually, I think that the key aspects are you bringing in the range of perspectives that are going to be required to make sure you're doing this properly? Given that, you know, what structures make most sense, and that's something we're still working through. I mentioned previously, you know, you could have a decentralized model, a centralized model, or somewhere in between, you know, based on what your business is already doing, based on how you're working with customers. So thinking about the structures of where those various perspectives need to sit and how they can easily come together, whether you're working in agile or waterfall or whatever it might be, what is going to make most sense to generate value as quickly as possible. How can we find the people, the talent that we need? That's something we are always asking ourselves. I know that's something my boss Adrian is particularly passionate about. I spend a lot of my time talking to talent and recruiting. I'm really interested in finding people not just with the technical skills, that's almost a hygiene factor, but also with the right attitude, the right motivation, humility, openness, natural collaborators, you know, looking for people with those kinds of qualities as well as the technical skills, thinking about, you know, how we can make sure that we're engaging with the right legal experts, the people who are really passionate about responsible innovation, but also not just want to kind of block innovation to make sure it's responsible, but also make sure we can accelerate it. So finding people with the right balance of attitudes and perspectives is really important. Team culture is so important. You know, I've mentioned that openness, that collaborative, just being very open, and that's the kind of culture that I personally want, and that's what I'm trying to build in the team, because I think this is gonna make sure that we learn from our mistakes, we fail fast, we pick that up, we learn lessons and move on, and I think that's going to be where we're going to make the most progress the most quickly. And I think importantly, the kind of the culture you're setting, the kind of perspectives you're coming in, those should support your objectives. You know, when you've brought those together, you know, those should be identified in your objectives, should be part of your objectives, not just that we will have a model that achieves X accuracy. I think it's also about, you know, we've got a happy team culture, we've got an open team culture, we've got the right talent, we're able to retain that talent, and so there's a whole set of objectives around that. And then what we also need to think about is how you prioritize the work. There are so many opportunities in BT and more widely to think about generating insight from data and to deploy AI. We have conversations with people across our business day to day about new opportunities, or opportunities that are kind of evolving somewhat, where you think there's a particular need and a particular opportunity that changes over time as you learn more about the data, as you learn more about your customer. So we've got effectively at this point, we've got our demand exceeds supply in terms of our ability to do that in the way we want to, and that's something we're working on. So how, in the meantime, do we prioritize? How do we identify those opportunities that are the ones that we should focus on first? And there are a range of different ways to think about this. You know, value should come into that. So going back to those value drivers, you know, how do those opportunities, how can they be ranked in terms of the amount of value that they might bring to the business? But I think the other axis you might be thinking about a classic 2x2 matrix is your ability to serve, your feasibility to develop. So, how easy is it to get the data? What kind of form is the data in? Have you got the right people with the right skills available? Have you got the business appetite and you've got clear ownership, clear buy-in from the business perspective? Are there any ethical concerns that you need to think about, or just things you want to keep an eye out for? So the whole different set of things you need to be thinking about. And again, which of those are most important when you're looking to prioritize the work? And again, when you're thinking about that, you should revisit the objectives and think about, if we take this opportunity up, how likely is it we're going to succeed? How feasible is it going to be? And what's the value going to come out? And what does that mean? So always going back to your objectives that are wider than the technology is really, really important. And then you'll notice that, I hadn't talked about the technology until very much near the end. There are kind of technical considerations. I've said not drivers. You shouldn't be driven too much by the technology. You should be driven by the opportunities, the value, the feasibility of those, and your prioritization. Then you can think about, okay, what are the technical considerations? So what is the right technology stack? Thinking about your cloud platforms, particularly one area we're looking at in huge detail is ML operations, ML ops. So thinking about what components, what tools we're going to need, not just to develop and deploy the models, but continuously monitor them going forward, check for drift. What does that mean for different use cases? Batch versus real time, for example. What kind of opportunities do we, what kind of components do we need for that? So that should be something you think about once you're very clear on what the opportunities are. And also where the data will come from. What condition is it in? Where is it currently sitting? Do you have the domain experts who can clearly explain where that data has come from, how it's being captured? Do the timestamps mean what they mean? Are they really reflecting the time at which the various events that reflect on the data actually occur? Or do you have race conditions, etc.? So understanding where that data is, do you need to migrate that onto cloud? Is that something you can do tactically while you do some model development, or do you need to wait until later on? What do you have available? Have you got, what other data sets might there be that might have an impact on what you're trying to do? So thinking about that, once you're clear on the opportunity, is really very important. And that's me. I was wanting to emphasize the fact that think about the people before you think about the technology. Think about what's most important to you in terms of the opportunities that your business has. Think about the value and the feasibility. The technology will come, but yeah, think about people up front. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. Happy to take questions in the chat as well.
Great, thank you very much, Zoe. Some really fascinating insights. We can talk about all the theoretical applications of building AI systems and ML systems, but this is where the rubber hits the road about actually getting them to work and actually add some value and benefits to the companies at the end of the day. So, Zoe, thank you very much for those insights. So I'll bring this particular session to a close, and then I'll, as usual, go onto your FeedLoop link, click on the next session, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes where we're going to have James Hamilton from TUI. So thank you very much.